to kind of grade ourselves and our participants. And I know that you filled that out for some of you in the survey originally, but for us to just kind of rethink about our mindset, we're going to start with that today. Before we do, I just want to give you an outline of how we're going to spend this hour and a half. It's going to fly by. I'm going to start with a UDL review, and then we're going to jump into the classroom planning piece. So originally this was not meant to be distance learning themed, but I tried my best to gather some resources, and I created a lesson plan that you can use to transfer this over to distance or blended learning for the fall. So we'll kind of play around with some of those tools, and then we'll think about it. We'll change our hat and we'll think about it for us as we design professional development. So I have a rubric that Katie Novak's provided for us to be thinking if our professional development really is UDL designed. And then finally, we're gonna put all of our hats on, our ELA hat, our history hat, we all have a different expertise here. And we're going to build up our UDL strategy bank that we can take back. So we may not have a ton of time to do that, but it's hopefully something that I would love to have. ELA, ELD has a great, the CIS subcommittee has a great UDL page that has, specific strategies for their content area. And I would love to have that for history. So created a collaborative slide deck for us to start to do that process. So UDL review, and just so you know, you may hear my baby screaming in the background. She's fighting a nap hard right now. So Florence can't be on camera, but maybe when she wakes up. Okay, so everything in this presentation is linked. So you will have to kind of open some of these to see them a little larger. But before I keep going on this, I want to advise some ways to take notes today. If you are a pen and paper person, you might want to have a pen and paper near you. If you're a digital note taker, you can always go in and make a copy, and then take notes right on the slides. So just two ways to kind of have this not be me lecturing at you, but really taking some notes for how this may be utilized in your COP. So here's what I'd love for us to do. You're gonna begin by scoring yourself. So go ahead and score yourself, and then also score teachers that attend your COP. So where would you be, and then where are your teachers? And then I'm gonna make this not editable because you guys are editing it right now. So if you guys could make a copy and not be on the original one, that would be great. And I'm making it so that you can only view, except it's not letting me do that right now. Here we go. Anyone who has the link can only view. Sorry, everyone. Okay. So to open links like this, you click on the picture and then a little link pops up underneath. So I'm going to be quiet, take 2 minutes, grade yourself, grade your participants, your teachers. And then once you think you know, go ahead in the chat, and if you feel comfortable, go ahead and share where you are and where you think your teachers are, and then what stands out. What of those phrases makes you think that they are there, or that you are at that place? So it is too small to read, so you're gonna need to have the slides open. You're gonna have to click on some of these things to do this today. So if you have the slides open, and if somebody could throw that link in the chat, that would be great. So you can click on the picture and the link will come up underneath it. So it says UDL implementation rubric. My chat is hidden underneath here. Here we go. Okay. So I'm seeing novice, UDL Explorer, districts just beginning to explore, intermediate, advanced, terrified of giving students choices. So for those of you who are saying you are just an explorer or your teachers are just an explorer, will one of you unmic and kind of share why you say that?
So for our districts, so therefore our teachers, it's really just now the whole idea of being introduced to our staff, and we're working closely with our county to do that. So folks, and then there were plans to really work on some lessons this spring, and that clearly didn't happen. So the hope is in the fall we kind of move along the continuum there.
Great, thank you. So now what about someone that is saying that they're at the intermediate or above? What's your background, or what are your teachers' backgrounds to make them there?
I know of some teachers who are probably at that intermediate level, and I think part of what prompted that, they might not even be able to tell you what UDL stands for, as somebody mentioned here, but something that I see a lot in their classrooms is project-based learning. So you'll see students working on PBL, and they've worked together collaboratively as teams, and they've modeled that within their school-wide leadership, so teachers have a voice in the curriculum they're implementing. And so they synthesize different resources like adopted curriculum materials, project-based learning, GLAD strategies. And so walking through their school, you'll see students working on things both collaboratively and independently and as a whole class, and with, so you see like this beautiful classroom in progress where students have voice and choice and options for showing what they know. And there are multiple means of engagement, representation, action, and expression. So it wasn't necessarily the result of a UDL training, but by modeling that among themselves or having the opportunity to be empowered as educators in a school-wide team, they're now also empowering their students in the classroom.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, with all of that in mind, knowing your teachers and knowing you, you may choose to deep dive some different resources today. But I want us to kind of have a background and an understanding in these 4 different things around UDL. Because what I hear a lot around UDL, and I think where I started in my, when we look at this rubric with this explorer, I really thought it was about choice, right? It was about giving them all these different materials. And that's really where I started. And that's great. And I think that that's where a lot of teachers start. Katie Novak actually says that assessment can be one of the easiest places to start for those of you who have heard her. But as we move into this realm of being unfamiliar with what the fall is going to look like, there's really 4 pieces that make up UDL. So these 4 highly interrelated components comprise a universally designed atmosphere. So it can be goals, methods, materials, or assessments. So as we think about how we can utilize this for history, it's not just providing options for materials that may be videos or podcasts or what we originally think of, but maybe it's starting with our assessments. Providing choice in assessments can be difficult, or our methods. We may not have a ton of control over that in the fall, but we might as we determine what that will look like. So I want to play this quick video from Katie Novak, and you guys just give me a thumbs up if you can hear it well.
UDL is a standards-based curriculum design, and before you provide provide any options for students about what they're going to learn, how they're going to learn it, or how they're going to give it back to you. You want to dive into your standards. And so often I hear teachers say, you know, I understand what UDL is. I understand that it's really great to give kids choices, but, you know, I teach math, or I teach writing, or I teach science, and therefore I have to have students solve equations, or write a narrative, or complete a lab project. And that's absolutely 100% true. UDL is a standards-based curriculum design. And so you always start with the standard and you look and you try to figure out what is it when I'm done with this lesson or unit that students have to know or what they have to be able to do. And then you ask yourself, what are all the possible ways that they can show me that they've actually met this standard? And it really comes down to thinking about whether your standards are content standards or method standards. And so content, for example, I want my students to know about the causes of the Civil War. I want them to know the electoral process. I want them to know about what figurative language is. There's a lot of options for how you can actually assess whether or not they know that. You could have them tell you. You could have them create some sort of children's book or a skit or an infomercial, or they could write about it, or they could, there's a million things. And sometimes I would even say to students, you tell me, if you don't like any of these options I've given you, you tell me another way that you think you can actually meet the standard. Alternatively, sometimes there's skills. Sometimes the standard is they need to be able to solve the equations. Sometimes they have to be able to write in response to a primary source document, or they have to be able to follow the steps of a lab. And when that is true, maybe there's different options we can give them. For example, can they work together, or can they work with a small group? Can they possibly use a graphic organizer, or see an exemplar first, or work alongside the teacher? Could they write about anything that they want to write about? Or could they use some tools that you're going to give them to help them, like a math reference sheet or a sheet of transitions they can use in their writing? And so it's really all about that every standard can be personalized, and the level at which you can provide choices is going to be pretty much managed by that standard. And so the next time you look at a standard, when you're thinking about teaching a lesson, ask yourself or ask your students, is there any other way to measure this besides this one way, besides this multiple choice test, besides this essay, besides this document-based question? And sometimes you're going to find that the answer is no. I have to provide choices of how they're going to have scaffolds to be able to do this well. But a lot of the times, if you kind of dig deep, you'll find that the answer is yes.
Okay. So hearing that message that every standard can be personalized and that UDL is a standards-based approach. It's not just fun times, good times, right? So we are not going to do this today, but I wanted to offer you, if you were working with teachers that were new to UDL, you were really introducing UDL as a concept, to give them a simple choice board. Of course, this is always better if you're in the classroom and you can really blend, or not classroom, but in a PD atmosphere, not over Zoom. And you can really do some hands-on work with some of these, but just wanted to give you some introductory materials that you can use if introducing UDL for the first time. Now, I would love for us to have a discussion about this quote, that learner variability is the rule, not the exception. There's a great quote here. And then there is also a link in here that will take you to some great resources. But go ahead and read this quote to yourself. Okay, when you're finished, we're going to take our knowledge of this quote into our activity that we're going to break into breakout rooms in just a second. So the real question is, who is UDL for, right? Who is it for? Why are we spending time at a history community of practice focusing on something that isn't necessarily only connected to history? So what I did was, there are some cards here. So you are going to have to open up this link to participate in this next activity. So if you click on this card, it's going to say student profile cards. Only one person in your group is going to have to know how to do this. So if you can't figure it out, it's okay. Somebody will learn in your group. And you are going to become one of these people. So there's learner number 1, learner 2, learner 3, learner 4, and learner 5. I'd like you, when you get into your groups, you'll be in room 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10, you're just a repeat. So 6 will be 1, 7 will be 2, 8 will be 3, 9 will be 4, and 10 will be learner 5 again. I'd like you to read about that description of that student. Look at their learner profile, which you will notice is jagged. If you're familiar with UDL, you'll know what that means, the jagged learning profile. So look at their learning profile. And then I want you to have a discussion of, one, what does that quote that you just read have to do with your student? And then 2, what are the implications for learning history, social science for you? And I'm going to put this in the chat so that when you start to talk about who you are as a person in your group, you'll have the questions to answer. But what are the implications for learning history, social science for you? So what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And really think about it in this environment. So being at home, learning right now, what are the implications for learning for you? Okay. So quickly before we move on, I just want to hear how that was for you. And I really would love for some people to unmic with the focus really being around the distance learning piece. So currently for these students, for the student that you were, what are some barriers or some strengths that you may have found?
On mine, we had the student 5. And so that one was really into writing narrative, but the reading fiction and reading was a little bit trickier. So in a distance learning world, it might be that being able to watch some video or do, kind of learn the history in some other ways rather than just read the chapter and do that might be a good way for them to do that. Now, the writing narrative part, it'll be interesting to see in a distance learning way if it's literally physically writing or if it's, if like my son, I've got a second grader that can't type. And so much stuff is in Google Classroom that he can't type. And so it's trying to get that. He can get ideas, but then the actual physicality of typing might be tricky. So in a case like this, I wonder, in a distance learning piece, it's like write this essay or write this story, but by typing it in Word or whatever, that could be a barrier as opposed to literally writing it out, in your journal or something like that. So maybe thinking of some other ways to do that. So yeah, it's been good. And it's funny. I see Scott's chat there, and the big thing for my little guy was when he learned about the speech to text option that he had, because he's like, I can do this now. And like, you still have to edit it, but yeah, you can. So, it's like learning those different types of things to be able to do it would be a really good way, but teachers would have to be able to, give that kind of hint and then provide for that as well.
Frank, just to piggyback on that, we had that same learner, and thought that the home situation isn't conducive to a distance learning environment. He's got a lot in the family. There's not really a place where he can go and be kind of quiet and get this done. So these are the kinds of kids that don't get engaged. They just kind of check out. So what can the teacher do to make sure that the students are engaged, and possibly putting them in these smaller Zoom rooms to have some small conversations and things like that. But again, it would depend on the ability of the device that he has to be able to do that. So lots of challenges there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up, Yvonne. So I added that on purpose. None of this was included before, but really thinking about what the barriers are to every kid, right? We have to know our kids to know these barriers. So not just some of the data that we've been collecting as districts, like, oh, they don't have internet, or oh, they're on a phone. That's a piece of it. But a lot of it is, do we know our kids well enough to know if they do have a new baby brother, or their parents are both working, right? Because environment is going to be a huge barrier during this time. you know, we didn't always have to address in the classroom.
Okay.
What else? One more person, unmic and tell us about your learner other than learner 5.
I can go. This is Beth from Region 4. We had learner 2, and he is into blogging and he is social. And so we thought that just is naturally part of civics learning and something that he's really into technology. So we felt like he would be somebody that you could really engage with, having them do a blog or thinking about ways that they could use this technology into the history of social science.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay. Some resources for you to visit later, because I think we know, and UDL has been around in the special ed world for a long time, and it's finally making its way into the general ed world, but specific articles on why UDL matters for English language learners, and then what kids with ADHD need to learn, a recipe from a mom who's also school superintendent. So picking out those pieces can be great resources if you're working with specific students or teachers with specific students. So that's our overview of UDL. We're going to jump right into the planning process now. So before we do that, I do want to show a video of what I think is a great example of what UDL looks like in action. I think this is a great place to start. This teacher is obviously very skilled, and looking at that rubric is probably at an advanced or above. So I don't want to show this as an overwhelming piece, but more as where we could be and what blended learning could look like if done well. So it is not linked for some reason. So I'm going to skip this part and come back to it in just a second. Because we had the Pear Deck conversation, I want to show you what Pear Deck looks like from the slides feature for those of you who are interested. So I was going to have us on Pear Deck, but there's quite a few of us, so I decided not to. But Pear Deck looks like this. You can ask questions. How would your character do in this classroom? What barriers would teachers have? And then you can all respond as the students and I, the teacher, see all of the responses. So I definitely encourage using Pear Deck. And then another one here is a mind map. So you can draw, you can write. Those accessibility tools are built into the presentation, which is extremely helpful. So what I would like us to do as I'm getting this video ready is to start to think about how we plan using universal design for learning. So let's pretend in our current environment that we are teaching the Bill of Rights, because the Bill of Rights is 5th, it's 8th, it's 12th, right? At every grade level, we can think about this. And if you're a teacher teaching the Bill of Rights, what are the barriers to access and engagement? Now, I don't just mean like, oh, they can't read the Bill of Rights. I want you to think about every single barrier that you can to the Bill of Rights in our current environment. Content, skills, social, emotional, environment, technology, everything. So I'm going to give you 1 minute. I want you to type as much as you can in the chat. Ready? Go. Every barrier you can think of. Okay. I'm seeing a lot in the chat: background knowledge, meaning, relevance, comprehension, no Wi-Fi, depression, connection to today's world, so many ideas. Bill of Rights is very hard to teach, not distance learning wise, so this is a difficult one. Now, why I start here is because with everything, I really want us to, if there's one takeaway, the takeaway is that barriers are never the child. So I look at that list and I did not see any of you write, oh, the kid, right? The kid's the issue. That's our starting point. The barrier is always something other than the child. So we think about it like this. If all of those barriers are there and that's our starting point, then how can we accommodate all of those barriers? If we think about it like a dinner party, we're hosting a dinner party for over 30 guests. What do? If these are all of the issues, right? Oh, Lucy, she's lactose intolerant. Nathaniel has a nut allergy. Greg can't eat wheat. Victoria's a vegetarian. Wanda's on a diet. Well, if we're hosting a dinner party, we're not going to say, hey guys, sorry, you can't come. I'm not going to feed you. The guest is never the barrier. The kid is never the barrier. So instead of being the teacher that plans 100 different lessons or the host of the party that plans 100 different meals, we're going to set out a buffet to address all of the barriers that you set up in that last chat. This has been one of the most helpful tools that we've utilized as a county when planning with teachers because it's simple. Has anybody used this tool before, the UDL barrier flowchart? You can give me a nod. No, I'm seeing no's, some yeses. So I think for us, it's been really useful because of its simplicity. Not even really starting with the principles and the guidelines, but really starting here as a flowchart of engagement. What does that look like? People hear the word engagement and they go, oh, kids, well, they're just not engaged. They're not excited. Well, that's not really what engagement means in UDL, right? So starting with, do the students care? Are they motivated to learn? Well, if the kids, some of you wrote about this, do not care about the Bill of Rights because they don't see relevancy, then we have to start here. And this is our flowchart to see where to begin. So we start by providing options for recruiting interests, and then we move on. Do the students understand the concept? Okay, maybe they care. They're in, they're set. Yes, they care. Now, can they comprehend what we're providing them? Are we only doing it in one way? If they can do that, then we move on in the flowchart. So for those of you who have seen the table mat here, this gives us the principles, the guidelines, and the checkpoints in order to do that. Now, what does that look like when we plan though? That's what teachers want to know. From the UDL network, most teachers have stated, we don't really care about the theory. We want to know how to use it to plan, right? So how do we use it to plan? Well, we've got to keep it simple. If we answer these UDL barrier questions and use it to address the barriers that you explained earlier, a lesson could look like this. It could be the 3 principles. It could be engagement. What are you going to do to engage them? Well, if this is my lesson, I'm going to use allsides.org to find an article, and then I'm going to use a discussion strategy. For representation, I'm going to do some blended learning, provide a podcast. For action and expression, I'm going to take something right out of that civics compendium to get them engaged, to get them taking action. So the way that we can really think about it is actually in a 3E model of learning. So I know a lot of you are probably familiar with the 5E model. I want to show you how these 3 principles can connect to the 3E model template. So here, engage would be the principle of engagement. Explore would be the principle connected over here to our flow chart of representation. And then explain would be action and expression. So if you're looking for the easy way to utilize UDL, maybe you're going to do this with your participants over Zoom and you want them to lesson plan, this is the way to do it. But it really starts with what you guys did earlier. It's with all of the barriers. You have to start with the barriers and list them all and then do your best to address those barriers. So in order to do that, we've got to have strategies to address those barriers, right? And that's where teachers always say they want strategies. UDL isn't just about strategies. It's more about addressing barriers. But once you know the barriers, you have to know how to solve them. So What I would like us to do is we're going to get back into random rooms again, and I'm going to have us go over these pieces that we just addressed. So the UDL barrier flowchart, you guys came up with barriers around the Bill of Rights, which is here, but I want you to go through and practice the UDL barrier flowchart for the Bill of Rights. So we know our standard. You can pick 5th, 8th, or 12th, or you can just say our goal, our standard is teaching the Bill of Rights. Now, how are you going to go through this? How are you going to get students to care? Are they motivated to learn? Address the barriers, think about them, talk about them. What are the barriers then to representation? Understanding the concept. And then what would the barriers be for them to show that they learned the Bill of Rights? Are they able to demonstrate learning in the traditional way that maybe the curriculum asked them to do the Bill of Rights in? So take the Bill of Rights as your theme, go back to your barriers you addressed, and work with a group to address this yes or no, yes or no, yes or no, and just talk it out. So Charlie, will you put us back into rooms? So really the point of that was just to give you practice with using this flow chart. I think people that have been doing UDL a long time, they automatically start by thinking about the barriers instead of what, I guess I can only speak for myself. Sometimes I fall victim to strategies first. And I get really excited about new strategies, whether they're discussion strategies or engagement strategies. And I want to use them quickly, right? Oh, this new ed tech tool, I just want to use Pear Deck. Well, that's great, but why am I doing it? Who is it for? What is the purpose? And when you have something like this as your UDL barrier flowchart, you really think up through asking yourselves these 3 questions and then planning this way. It's an easy way to predict the barriers, address the barriers, and plug in the strategies for a purpose. So could a couple people unmic and talk about what you guys did in your group?
I will talk, but I'm not showing my face. Our group, first of all, we would like to petition for another minute or 2 when we're in our groups, because both times we didn't quite get to finish. But one of the things that we did talk about, we just got through the first part, is do they understand what, I can't read the text, what we're talking about. And so what we spent a majority of our time just now in the breakout room discussing was that whether they do or don't, it's really important for teachers to make a real world or real life connection to their students, especially on a topic like the Bill of Rights. And doing that will gain interest. And it's also important to consider students' personal experiences and backgrounds when discussing something like the Bill of Rights, because they may have a negative feeling or experience with some of the things that are discussed. One of the people in our groups shared that one of the ways he brought interest, I can't remember who it was, he brought interest to his students was he had an example that he would start the unit on where he read an article from The Onion, which, if you don't know, it's a fictional newspaper out of the Midwest. And so The Onion talked about how the Bill of Rights was being restructured and there was only going to be 6 instead of 10. And so it got the students really thinking like, wait, is that true? Can they do that? And so it was kind of a fun way to get them involved. That was honestly, that was as far as we got, because we were really talking about how to get them engaged. So
yeah, you started you were ready to build a whole lesson plan in that breakout.
We really were.
So I want to just point out that Laura is like excited about the process that she's going through. And I was in another room and I felt that same feeling that when you guys have the freedom to start to answer these questions, plan strategies, and do some of this planning, it becomes a creative outlet, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Makes me want to be back in the classroom, but I'm not going yet.
Does one more person from another group want to unmic and kind of share what they did?
I'll share. It's Molly. One thing that came up, one of our colleagues, Christy, mentioned was not only are we looking at the relevancy and being able to relate the Bill of Rights to today through the eyes of a very gregarious student who likes to be social media minded, but also looking at it in terms of building some agency in sorting the Bill of Rights into items of importance and rating them, because that not only gives choice, but that also establishes a sense of agency and determination to make it more relevant. And then there was commentary about connecting fiction with real world purpose. So perhaps taking a segment, a small piece of literature, and comparing it to today's example from the Bill of Rights. And that empowers that sense of purpose and agency and relevancy to today. And also teaches the students who often forget to infer or make connections between literature and real life to do that, to see how powerful something that happened in Les Miserables might be to an example from the Bill of Rights today, even though it's American. So that was our conversation.
You guys really utilized the learning profile characteristics here on the side. I just want to point out that this is just one person's take on what these could be, right? If you have certain strengths or weaknesses or what you would want to include in your students' learning profiles, these can look very different. So this was more of the ELA history connection, but feel free to be thinking about other characteristics when you do your planning. Well, thank you guys for sharing. I'm going to jump into just kind of resources that, that you can take back to your participants or you can use. If you click on this, these are all different considerations for engagement directly from the UDL website. I thought these were helpful once you know what the barriers are, right? So if you have students that are always doing things like, what should I do next? What do you think I should choose for my project? Then you might need to support some risk taking, and there's some tips there around that. But the other pieces here are directly connected to distance or blended learning. So what I did was I pulled out some resources for you for each principle that you could use to support during this time. So the first principle being engagement, we have to start here because if kids are not engaged, they do not care, then they will not sign on to do the lesson, right? Anybody have that experience so far or hear that that's happening now in May with distance learning? My husband, he teaches high school and he's giving Starbucks cards to kids at this point if they sign on to Zoom. So that's where we're at.
Wow.
So starting here, just a plethora of resources for distance learning around engagement. Now, we don't just pick, right? We don't just tell teachers to, okay, pick your favorite or pick the one you're interested in, but it really needs to deal with the point of what the barrier is. Now, I want to point out, and I think Scott is on here. I pulled one of these directly from him. So I do want to give a shout out to Laco for doing an awesome webinar around engagement and really around feedback, because I think that that's a piece that people miss in engagement in universal design for learning. So if you click on this, this will go to Scott's presentation on 6 distance learning tips, especially the piece around feedback. The others are just feedback games, making a personal connection, an emotional connection. This was a great thing that I just threw on Twitter. I just asked what was going well for people when they were having Zoom calls or video calls with their students. What strategies have gotten kids online, basically. So these are all linked to different resources that teachers have used that have been successful to get kids engaged during this online learning time. Inquiry questions. We know here at the History Community of Practice that those inquiry questions connected in the framework are great ways to get kids hooked. So again, engagement is here. Representation is here. So to give you a summary of representation, it's really the student choice piece, right? So maybe that's a student-paced pear deck. Maybe that's a choose your own adventure. Maybe that's a history, mystery, or a game board. These are all linked to templates and examples that you can provide. And then finally, the assessment piece, right? So how are we going to assess? Again, just like before with engagement, these are 10 tips from UDL around assessment considerations. And then some examples of what your assessment could look like during this distance learning time. It could be a DBQ template, it could be Flipgrid, it could be choice boards. These are just all creative ways that I've seen this done. So I know that that's a lot of resources. I do want to give you some time to explore this, but before I do, I kind of want to show you all the resources. And the final piece are, these are just strategies that I've curated from various places, but I wanted to keep these separate because not all of these are distance or blended learning resources. A lot of these are discussion strategies. Some of them being from Facing History and Ourselves that I got from Mary during the presentation that she did at our county. But if you click on these 3 different parts of the brain, you will find slides that are linked to different strategies. So these will explain the how and the what it is. So this is kind of your takeaway. You can go to all 3 brains. Again, these are not just distance learning. So that's why these are separate. These ones are distance, these ones are not. They may have some things that you could use for distance or blended learning in them, but I will say a lot of them are discussion based for in the classroom. So I want to give us, because I'm just going crazy with resources right now, I want to give us a few minutes to stop and review these things, and then we're going to think about how we can use them in just a second. So I'm going to give you, like, I know it's not a lot of time, but let's take 3 to 4 minutes to like stand up, shake it out, do whatever you need to do, go grab some water if you need to, and then just click around and review some things that you have. And we're going to come back together at 10:39 and figure out how we can put this all into a package.
From Alameda. I guess I'm thinking about secondary and thinking about teachers who have, let's just say realistically, upwards of 150 students a semester, and on the barrier piece. So maybe the answer is the buffet, but I'm wondering whether we're really expecting teachers to literally know the individual learning barriers of all 150 students, or are we saying more realistically, these are the kinds of things, and I've been teaching for a while in this context, I know my kids generally, these are the kind of issues that they tend to struggle with? Or are we actually saying that you should know the barriers of each and every one of your 150 students?
Yeah, so I totally agree, Ben. I taught, junior high and high school. I had 180 kids. It would be more general, but I also think about, you have those few kids that you're always like, how can I get that kid? And you may pick some of their specific things. You may go, gosh, I bet that if I include this article on the Bill of Rights in it, I taught in a really low income area, and there was a lot of gang, rural gang. It's always weird, but I picked out specific articles that reached that. As in UDL, we say designed to the edges, that reached that edge. And it probably didn't bring in every kid. And some of my lessons were probably connected to certain kids that weren't connected to others. But I think when we just ask those generic like barrier questions, or at least we do it within a PLC, hey, in my 9th grade history PLC, what are the most common barriers?
Right.
But yeah, you're right. It's going to look different. But in a class of K-5, 25 kids, you really can do that.
Right. But to your point, I guess I realize that if you're recognizing slippage or kids who are not engaged, I mean, that's not true of hopefully every kid in your class. So you can begin to focus, I guess, over time, even with a large group, on those who are obviously not connecting.
And I will say too, this isn't just materials and curriculum. So to go back to that idea of goals, what does our goal look like? I think about, this is sort of a tangent, but thinking about push-in with our special ed students, my husband, they're having a conversation now about how some things haven't gone very well, and that they have some students with severe disabilities in their general ed classes that are distracting to other students, and just changing the mindset, starting with the idea that the student is not the barrier, right? Even if it seems like it, and the student with Tourette's is having an outburst, or the student who throws chairs is throwing chairs in first grade. Again, what is the barrier, right? And just starting there.
And there's some, it's not perfect, but there's some ways, like in the beginning of a semester or term, you can get to know your students. Like really, Sheg, the autobiography, I learned so much about my students. And we usually do that at the end of week 1 or into week 2. And then I give my kids a Google survey. So if you do a Google survey and different learning styles of what works, what doesn't work, you have that pie chart data, which can highlight, and it's going to be different from class period to class period as a teacher of high school, but then also looking at your IEP. So you can create or have some basis of what are those big ideas, and then also include student choice or something in a choice board, an option for kids, so that you can do the variety and incorporate things to try to hit all those kids. And it's not going to be perfect in high school. And I recognize that myself, teaching 3 world sections and 4 AP Gov sections, but it's a big way I can harness that data to keep those things in mind with my students.
Well, and Liz, you need to hold that, because we're going to do that in just a second. So don't forget what you just said. Okay, so I'm going to move into the piece of packaging, because I think this is where we're ready to go to. How do we package a lesson to look like this? So of course, this is UDL. I'm not just going to give you one option. I'm going to give you 4 options. So the one that I have used with teachers, because my teachers were newbies, needed to be something they were familiar with, and my teachers are familiar with the 5E model. So I kept it simple, and I showed this to you already. I'm on slide 27. The 3E model that I created here as a template takes the language from the 5E lesson plan out of Engage, Explore, Explain, and connects some of the UDL principle language, but starts with something that I never did. I don't know why I didn't. And it starts with, before I start to make a plan for engagement, what are my barriers for engagement? Let me type them out. Now that I know what those barriers are to engagement, which is really just motivation and persistence, then let me make a plan. Now I'm ready to do explore. What are all the barriers to representation? Let me type them all out. Then I'm going to make a plan. Okay, so this is your simplified version. Your more intense versions for your more experienced UDL people are almost, I think they're all from Katie Novak or CAST. So you can use the UDL Teacher's Guide. You can use the barrier ID and removal. I actually have used this with teachers as well. And this can be super helpful, especially if they're not going to do all of this in one lesson. Most often you don't, Katie Novak says that you don't use every guideline, principle, and checkpoint in every lesson that you do. So this might be a better resource, especially if you're trying to think about all of the different ways that you can do representation. And then if you're using that UDL flow chart, then you can plug this in. And then finally, another one from Katie Novak here, the UDL lesson plan review. So
real quick, Kendra, so all of these things that Kendra has here, I mean, really recommend going in, clicking, getting into that Google Drive, and then downloading or saving a copy of it. So rather than have 40 or 50 files in that, she's put everything in this one PowerPoint. So it'd be awesome to spend a little bit of time getting into each of those slides, just clicking through those and saving them all. I think that would be great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just want to note that in a perfect world, if we were together, it's a lot easier to do this stuff when it's printed, right? To see the lesson plan, to interact with it, to take notes on the barriers. I just really recommend that if you do go through this process with teachers, that at least you print it out, or you ask that they print it out if we are in an environment like this, because I think it makes it a lot easier. So here's the packaging. It's up to you to figure out how you're going to do this with teachers, or how you're going to utilize it to help lesson planning. So before we move into our last piece, does anybody have any ideas, or has anybody used these before?
Just one thing, Kendra, also to think about when we think about the barriers, as you said before, I even tweeted your quote. Sometimes the teachers can get into, when we talk about the barriers, they talk about the kids. You know, oh, this kid is this kid is that, this kid is that. It's really trying to facilitate it so you're not talking about the kid, but just what the situation is and what the thing is. So sometimes I've had this with some of my teachers, is they go down rabbit holes of that kid and all the issues that they might have, as opposed to the bigger, well, what are the bigger barriers that they're facing? So I think that's something as well to consider.
And I just would like to piggyback on that, and by saying, because I agree that could happen pretty easily sometimes in the conversations, but then just reminding them or reassuring them that then pick one that's manageable, or don't do all three at once. So, you know, breaking it down as needed by your group.
Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, well, we're gonna move into our final piece. I have one for you that this is just a takeaway. Okay, we're not gonna do anything with it. This is UDL planning considerations for professional development. So everything that I've shown you is for you to do with teachers. This is something for you to use for yourself. Something we did a UDL Summer Institute 2 years ago when I worked at Tehama County, and we noticed that our UDL Summer Institute was all of us sitting at these tables. Our environment was not universally designed. We had these teachers that, you know, oh, we're going from 8 to 12, and we've got no break. And we have no snacks. There were so many barriers to what we were providing. We had the slides on the screen. If they didn't bring their own computer, like, oh well, a lot of things weren't printed. So we really didn't think about whether our UDL professional development was designed universally for everyone to have access to what we were teaching. So I think some of these are just good reminders for us as professional development providers to see if what we're doing really is connected to what our teachers need, to think about what the barriers are there. So finally, I'm going to use every minute that I have, and I want us to go back into our rooms for the last 5 minutes and build our history buffet. So I am not the provider of all strategies. I only taught junior high and a little bit, just junior high. So strategy wise, I don't have them all. I really need K-5 support. I really need high school support. I think we all have expertise in the room that we can lend to build up an amazing history UDL buffet. So what I would like for us to do, and it doesn't need to be perfect, and it's really just throwing ideas out there like Liz already started to do. She had some awesome engagement ways to get to know her kids from the beginning. She's going to go in, click on the brain, and add to these slide decks. So there's a reason that I made these editable, is because I want us to add to them. Now, I am giving us editing rights, which means that we need to be so careful. Of course, it's Google. I can always go back and change it. If you make a mistake, it's okay. But I need us to go in and add something. So I will format it. It doesn't need to look perfect. Don't worry about it. But if you have some ideas, let's go back into our breakout rooms for 5 minutes. And even if it's just the name of the strategy that you want to put in there, or simple ideas, and then we can keep building on this. Maybe Frank, at our next COP, we could go back in and see if some more things are added. So this doesn't have to be done today, but just some ideas, some brainstorming. Sound good?
So there's a question in the chat there, strategy or resource, or does it?
Either. If I don't think it fits, then I'll move it. How about that? Okay. Are we all good?
Ready for me to send everyone?
Yes.
All right.
So to close, finally, what I would love for you to do is in the chat or anywhere, what will you savor from today, as this was, buffet themed? Your dessert, what will you take away? What will you savor? You can type in the chat or you can unmic.
I really liked the quote that you started with, describing basically everyone and how everyone has some kind of barrier, so to speak, and getting us to really think about how to overcome those. And I liked the collaboration, thinking about different ways. I mean, I think the online brainstorming for how to, not online, but the brainstorming for how to make distance learning easier and better for everyone. I think that was really super helpful to have those ideas, just kind of throwing them out there. And then the planning part, I mean, to really think about what can we do, let's be realistic. And then your just overall presentation, right? There was a lot here today. Thank you.
I really enjoyed the jagged learning profiles and how you had specific individuals rather than talking about it in a general continuum and then having people think like, oh yeah, it really hammers home that point, because I can't tell how many times I've been delivering PD to teachers and have them say, my kids can't read.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they read at such a low level and they can't write. And it's like, okay, that's not the end of the world. It doesn't make them dumb. That just means they can't read, you know? And then being able to explore that and having teachers get that opportunity to really dig in and start seeing those things as barriers rather than as kids.
Yeah, that's a great point. One more.
Kendra, I love the way that you organized the resources in categories, because you made it so accessible, and also comparing the 3E to UDL was a perfect blending of making sense of the common language between the two. So thank you. It was great job today.
Thank you. Well, my hope is that you can deliver this to whoever you need to. I'm happy to be there as a resource. And if you need support or anything, I'm no UDL expert. We just have been trying it with teachers. So please, 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 I mean, in a perfect world, we'd cut out the cards and they'd be in groups and you'd read the articles and but that's just not the reality that we're in right now. And I think we're forced to do what the teachers are doing. And if we're going to design blended learning, it's different than what we're doing right now, right? This is emergency distance learning. This is not blended learning. That most teachers are not doing that. So let's take the summer, take the fall to support teachers and what that might look like. And I think we're all there to help, right?